Welcome to this week's edition of the Old Poetry Podcast. But before we get started, I want to tell you about our new sponsors, Veterans for Veterans. If you served after 1987 and your hearing's taken a knock from your time in the forces, these are the people to speak to. They've helped thousands of veterans like us claim compensation for tinnitus and hearing loss. They're ex-military themselves, so they genuinely get it.
It's free to check if you qualify, and the claims are no win, no fee. To get started, click the link in this video or visit veteransforveterans.co.uk.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Old Poetry Podcast. And it is my pleasure today to be joined with former Royal Irish soldier and genuinely all-round good bloke, Ian Getty. How are we doing, Ian?
Not too bad, mate. Not too bad. How are you?
Yeah, really good, mate. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. When anyone that comes on the podcast makes time to have a little bit of chat with me. So for the viewers and the followers at home, they've probably seen Ian's been in the news quite recently regarding the events that unfolded back in 2000 in Sierra Leone. We'll come on to that. But there's much more to Ian than just that one operation. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Ian over the last couple of weeks. We've attended a couple of events together. And I just want to kind of do his story justice in his career, because for me, it's an amazing career. I think it's absolutely an accomplished career in the military. And I just want to get a better understanding of you for the viewers and followers at home. So, yeah, whereabouts you from, Ian? Where'd you grow up?
So originally Belfast, back in the day. So yeah, grew up in Belfast for most of my life up until about the last few years when I got out of there. But yeah, grew up in Belfast. I suppose a wee bit interesting back in the 80s and 90s, but so, quite honestly, I was sheltered from it. I didn't see a lot of what was going on. There was bits and pieces, but I was kept sort of quite far away from that. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to give you a nice, interesting childhood story, but I don't really have one. It was pretty normal. It was kind of went to school, did my stuff. All the usual things.
Well, fair play. I mean, I said this to you when we spoke at that function that we were at. It's like what I noticed with a lot of the guys your age and from Northern Ireland is what resilience they kind of have with growing up in that environment. Now, you said you were a little bit sheltered, but you were still very aware that was what was going off in Northern Ireland around them times. And for a lot of lads growing at your age, it was hard not to see it, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's a part of it, mate, where it's just you're born into it, sort of born in 1980. It's already normalised. Everyone's used to it. And kind of it's been going on then for 11 years. It's pretty much normalised. And you sort of pick that up. So it's for someone coming in, it was probably very, very weird.
Yeah, well, from reflection from over here, obviously we get a different side of it. If you're growing up in it and around it, you kind of like say you adjust to it and it just becomes the norm. So what was the backstory of you joining the military? I mean, you joined the cadets first. Was that kind of a sort of a deciding factor for you to then to go on to join the military?
No, look, I was always going to join the army. My granddad was in the army. Joined when he was 13, I think.
Wow.
Did 27 years. Royal Ulster Rifles, so sort of one of the predecessors to Royal Irish. World War II and all that. And if I'm being brutally honest, they didn't have it back then. He probably had some serious PTSD from that. But I never saw it. He didn't talk about it much, but I sort of got enough war stories to get me interested.
Yeah, I know.
And I think I knew from an early age I was going to join the army. I did. I was definitely going to join. So I was hanging out to get in the cadets at 13. Did a bit of time with them, and then I was still at school, but I actually joined the TA in 97, I think, just to get a bit more realism. And that was sort of where it started. It kind of went from there, basically.
Yeah, so like obviously, I say this a lot about reserves, that they don't get the credit sometimes for kind of what they do, and this is genuine. Like we had some guys that were like 4 para attached to the regular battalions, and I always say it's like to give up your free time as well as holding down a normal job takes a lot of commitment, doesn't it? I don't think that some of the TA guys get a lot of sort of the recognition that they deserve. Would you agree with that?
100%. I mean, I had a great time. in the TA or the reserves, and still have friends from sort of back then, whenever that was, nearly 30 years ago. But I mean, yeah, I was sort of filling time at that point. I knew I was going regular. You'll hate this, mate. My original plan was to join the Marines. I know. So I went to join, and you've met me. They told me, go away. You're not big enough. Come back in a year when you've had a couple of protein shakes or something. And that was still the plan. But obviously, as you said, the reserves get kind of attached to the regulars. I got the chance to go to Kosovo with Royal Irish. That was 99, and do the tour there. I kind of never went back. I left Royal Irish then. I went in 99 and left 14 years later. So, yeah, but look, I had a great time in the reserves, and it set me up and it got me into Royal Irish, and a real good sort of foundation, I think. Getting that sort of, how would you put it? Sort of building you up and learning some skills that'll serve you well in the future. At the same time, like I say, I was still at school and a bit of university before I committed to the regulars.
It's not necessarily a bad way of doing it. I mean, that gives you a bit of a taster to see if you like it or you don't like it. So again, the criticism there is, well, your TA, you're not fully committed, or you're not as kind of well trained as the regulars, if that's what best way of putting it. But I'd probably agree with you there. It gives you a good foundation to almost try it out and see, you know what, I think I could do this as a full-time profession. So it's a good way of doing it, isn't it?
It's brilliant for that, mate, because, I mean, it's like you say, you're not full-time, but sort of like a 2-week annual camp in Sennybridge or somewhere. You find out very quickly if you're going to be absolutely hanging out when it's pissing down rain and you're freezing. And you find out if it's for you. And like I said, I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. And not everyone set out to be a regular. The reserves they bring a lot to the party when they do join us on the tours and stuff. They're as good in a lot of places as some of the regulars are. I never look down on the reserves. I never would. I'm sure there's people that do, but I think you've summed it up nicely, mate. These are people that are doing a sort of 9 to 5, and then kind of turning up to the military party at the weekend, and they bring other things. You think of someone like a paramedic who's also working the reserves. They're bringing a lot to the party with their civvy skill set. So it's different, but it's no less worthwhile, I don't think.
No, it's a very good point. It is, and again, I don't think it gets as much sort of I don't know, bigging up, if I want for a better word, as it should do, because again, it's a massive commitment. And then to go with the reserves or the TA over to Kosovo as well. Was that like a full-time reserve service then? Is that you signed up to go on a tour?
Yeah.
So for the viewers at home, you can, if you're in the if you're ex-military regular or you're in the kind of TA, you can actually jump on a tour with a regular battalion and go and do that 6 months, and then go back to the TA or go back to Civvy Street as well, can't you? In some stations, I think that's the
yeah.
So that Kosovo tour as well, that was kind of obviously a big sort of operation, really, when you consider not a lot had happened prior to that. I mean, this is pre-Sierra Leone, pre-Afghanistan, pre-Iraq. So that was the first real conflict that British troops got sent to. Obviously, Northern Ireland, which again gets sort of overlooked when you go on operation. Northern Ireland, as you well know, was a very brutal place to operate through the 80s and the 90s, and the 70s, 80s and 90s. But as far as overseas, as in foreign country, if you like, that'll get a lot of criticism in. But like Kosovo and stuff like that was a big deal. So how did you find that tour?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. Like I say, I was like, what was I, 19? So you think you're grown up, you're not. I've done a bit of the TA stuff, but you'll probably know yourself, the regular army could be quite sort of brutal back then, in those days, and it was a bit of a culture shock. Number one, joining the sort of just getting into the regulars and getting into that swing of things, and sort of the tour itself, that's, Northern Ireland was brutal, but like I say, it was pretty sheltered. Kosovo, you're not being sheltered. To be honest, most of my time there, the fighting had been done. What we were kind of like working as a police force. So what was happening was the sort of Kosovo Albanians were cutting about, murdering any Serbs that were left in the city. That was Pristina. And you're talking about old women and kids and just people that couldn't get out. So it was a kind of a bit of a reality check, a kind of pretty hard introduction to how the real world works.
Yeah, again, I think it was one of them operations that got overshadowed. You know, at the time, it was obviously big news and everything else. And then not long after that, you know, we obviously had Sierra Leone, which again, I think has been overshadowed by post 9/11 kind of things. You know, the Afghanistan and the Iraq campaigns seem to have overshadowed those conflicts. But people need to hear about them and they need to hear the stories because they were brutal places to operate. They were great for soldiering and stuff like that. I mean, I never did Kosovo. I was in Northern Ireland at the time, but I know I speak to a lot of guys that were on the ground there, and they said it was a brilliant operation again for honing your skills and stuff.
Yeah, no doubt about it, mate. It's like you say, Kosovo, Sierra Leone, they were maybe Bosnia as well. You know, we're not better than Northern Ireland, just something different. You know, Northern Ireland had been going for so long and was a specific skill set. It's probably good to get out to places like this and do something a bit different. See what works from Northern Ireland, but there's going to be other stuff as well that you need to bring in. So it probably helped kind of round everybody off after Northern Ireland and just sort of enhance the skill set and stuff. I agree. You're probably right. 9/11 hit Afghan, Iraq, and again, not taken away from them, you know, but they're the sort of the big news stories. Kosovo probably a bit smaller. Sierra Leone definitely a smaller operation. They maybe do get overlooked a bit, I think. Particularly, I think Afghan it's the one that sells the papers, or it was for a long time. So yeah, you're probably right, but no less of a tour. You know, Kosovo had its challenges. Sierra Leone, obviously, for different reasons.
Well, yeah. Well, that brings us on nicely. Now, if you haven't seen already, the Op Barras podcast is out. You know, go check it out and go and have a look at it. Go check it out. We go into depth about Operation Barras, the operation that we're going to cover now, and involved, sadly, Ian being kidnapped by the West Side Boy rebels. And I'll let you tell the story. So that was what I didn't know until chatting to you, was obviously you went on that as an FTRS as well, didn't you? So attached to a regular as well. I didn't know that. I thought you were a regular at that time.
No, well, look, I'll jump into the story, Benji, because it's a weird one. After Kosovo, you can extend FTRS, which I did. I think maybe the February 2000, the opportunity came up for P Company. So I thought I'll stay on and have a crack at P Company, which was horrific. The Marines were right, I wasn't big enough. But yeah, I got P Company done, and the jumps, and then Sierra Leone came sort of pretty quickly after that. It was actually after Sierra Leone that I went regular. I'll tell it because I get a lot of abuse for this. It's an interesting story. And after Sierra Leone, I went on my NCO Carter. I think it was about 4 days before the end of the NCO Carter, I was taken away to sign the Oath of Allegiance to go regular. So I signed on regular, got promoted to Lance Jack, and then spent at least a few weeks with battalion arguing about whether they were going to send me to ITC Catterick to do the full basic training package as a Lance Jack with 2 tours. So I was staring down the barrel of going to ITC for 6 months as a Lance Jack, which I think would have been horrendous.
There's no logic in that. You've already got experience, and which we'll rewind on to a minute to the whole Sierra Leone incident, but you've got 2 operational tours under your belt there, and you're a Lance Corporal, and they want to send you back. That's the army logic all over, isn't it?
Yeah, it was, mate. And obviously, I got grief the whole career for never doing ITC. Obviously, I did the reserves version, whatever that is, 2 weeks. But, you know, I thought, well, I'm glad I didn't go, but it would have been interesting to turn up with 2 tours and a stripe on to ITC as a crew bag.
Wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have worked because it's just you probably would have had an easier time of it if that's the right way to say, because they'd have had respect for you, or at least they should have done. But at the same time, I don't see the logic. You've already proved yourself as good enough to serve with the regular battalion, so I don't see the point in going back. That's kind of a stupid idea if you ask me. But luckily you didn't. But rewinding to the Sierra Leone, and again, I don't want to take anything away from the Op Barras podcast special that we've done, because it's an amazing podcast, and we get 3 different sort of viewpoints from the planning stage, from your split your kind of point of view, obviously being held hostage, and then we get the kind of attack on the village from sort of Power Edge kind of view as well. But talk us through, I'm not going to say briefly because that sounds wrong, but talk us through the events that led up to the kind of whole Sierra Leone thing, if you're comfortable with that, Ian.
Yeah, no worries. So, yeah, like you say, I mean, I'll try not to take away from the other podcast, but yeah, tour in Sierra Leone, a lot of stuff documented about the powers and the Pathfinders had been in various other units and basically pushed the RUF back, who were the rebels, back from Freetown. And the follow up to that was going to be us, sort of the British Army training the Sierra Leone Army, which is what we went out to do. So we sent maybe a company plus out. To be honest, I was part of, I think, Ben's platoon or whatever they called it. So I'd spent a load of months stagging on. And eventually, whatever decision was made that day, they decided to start launching patrols a bit further out, sort of up country. So the second patrol that day, that afternoon, we'd been up to see the UN, who were kind of on the front line. And then we went to see the West Side boys. Now, again, there's a lot of talk around why we went up there. At the time, the West Side boys were sort of seen as friendly forces. They certainly weren't seen as enemy. And yet, as part of that patrol, to sort of map out the front line and what was going on, it was probably worth a meeting with them. It didn't go that way. We drove straight into an ambush. We got captured and sort of spent 17 days captured before, SF launched Operation Barras, which was the rescue. And so, again, I've sort of mentioned it before, 20, you think you're sort of a full grown up man. Once you're captured, you're not. You're like a little kid again. It's a pretty tasty situation. But yeah, I've said it before. I was kind of surviving in there. There was a lot of our sort of more senior ranks keeping us alive, basically, and doing the thinking. I think my main task in there was looking after the cigarettes, which was about my level, to be honest, mate.
No, that's fair enough. But no, I mean, again, I'm not going to delve too much into it. But again, for the viewers and followers at home, obviously it's been highly documented, and so it should be as well, because Ian's story, when you check out the Op Barras podcast, is one of resilience and courage and all those kind of values. And I think we touched on it on the Barras podcast. We said about how the decision when you got ambushed by about 150 West Side boys, didn't you?
I'd say thereabouts. Probably about 150. And like I say, it was an ambush. There was a cutoff. Sort of had that technical behind us with the anti-aircraft weapon and stuff as a cutoff. So it was. It's controversial, but we're pretty sure that the UN had told them we were coming, so they were set up. And yeah, you're talking 11 of us. We had Musa, who was the Sierra Leone officer, who was working as sort of like an LO with us. But I don't think he was armed. So it was 11 of us, about 150 of them. And yeah, as you sort of mentioned, the call was made pretty quickly by the OC, don't shoot back. We're going to have to talk our way out of this. And it was the right call. I think we're alive. One shot and it would have been a whole different story and we wouldn't be doing this podcast.
Yeah, there's not a lot you can do in that sort of situation. And obviously if it was pre-planned and if they had cut-offs and they had kind of, they sounds like they were proper set off. So you say, I think I wasn't there obviously, but the right decision was made that, kind of obviously save your life and that of your colleagues, but which led on to 7 days in captivity in the middle of the jungle with quite brutal kind of the West Side boys. And again, I'm not going to delve into details because it's covered quite a lot and I don't want for you to keep bringing it up as well. Plus you've spoke to a lot of the tabloid papers. It's been in the Express, it's been in quite a few of the papers, hasn't it?
I think recently was the Express and the Daily Mirror. I think it was the recent ones. That was based on sort of the trip back to Sierra Leone we did with Veterans for Veterans, and obviously things like the podcast coming out now and stuff like that. So it's got a bit of attention and sort of brought it back in, and rightly so, being the 25th anniversary. I think it's a good time to kind of bring it up again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll move on from it and we'll come on to your journey back to Sierra Leone and how sort of beneficial it was for you and kind of your findings when you were there and stuff like that, and part of your recovery as well, I suspect. So obviously Sierra Leone's finished. You've come back, and you had another incident, didn't you? Which I didn't know about again until we spoke. I'll let you describe where you kind of end up coming off the back of involved in an RTC. Is that right?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned earlier, after Sierra Leone, well, a couple of weeks leave and a bit of adventure training, then I went on my NCO Carter. So we passed that, we came back, we did, I can't remember, is it a pass out or something where they hand out the stripes? And you'll know yourself, when something's wrong in the army, you can feel the tension building, and everybody knew something was wrong. What happened was someone somewhere along that course had lost a CWS. So instead of us getting our stripes and going to the NAFI and getting on it, we were loaded on the 4 tons for the 6-hour drive back to Bracken to look for this CWS. Obviously, a sort of different time back then was health and safety. So number one, we all got in the 4 tons and just got in our sleeping bags to get the head down. And like I've said to a lot of people, top tip, if you're going to do that, point your feet towards the front. I didn't. But we went on the drive, and fair play to the driver, who was absolutely hanging out. He almost made it. I think we were about half an hour from Senny Bridge, I think it was, when he put it in a ditch. He just fell asleep, I think. I shot forward like a torpedo, hit my head off sort of the front end of the 4 ton. Got up and got out and went to the med centre, and classic army med centre stuff. Got about, I think they gave me a pack of bruising. So off I went to the pub that night. So we went to the bar that night. Next day, not feeling great, and eventually sort of says I need to go to the hospital, which I did. And where I'd broke my neck, it was C2, so it's right up at the top. It's quite high up. It's quite serious, but it's hard to find as well. So it took about 3 days even for the hospital to find it. And sort of long story short, you then go into this, they call it halo traction. They put this metal thing around your head, and it kind of attaches to like a body armor you wear, which stops you moving your neck at all. And I think that was about the next 4 months of my life, just sitting at home with this halo thing on. And then obviously a lot of physio after that, and a lot of physio and sort of getting you do physio at the start. When you put the halo thing on, you have to learn to walk again because your balance is everywhere. And then you take it off, you're back to learning to walk normally again. And then sort of back into the soldiering once I came out of that. Actually, I think it was Tim Collins, who obviously you've had on, and sent me on a Spanish course and then sent me to Gibraltar for 6 months to work with the Gibraltar Regiment. So something a bit interesting. So that was most of 2001, either in the sort of rehab or out in Gibraltar. And then by 2002, back into it. Back to battalion and getting ready for various bits and pieces. Interestingly enough, in Gibraltar, I'd met a load of Navy SEALs, sort of out on the lash, and they'd invited me to go climbing with them. So I'd say, yeah, no problem. And the second we got the ropes up, every bleeper they had went off. So turns out that was 9/11. And they just kind of got this message, pack up your kit and get ready, we're going to war. I remember clearly someone said, who with? And they said, we don't know yet. But somebody was about to get hit. So that was 9/11. And then obviously you sort of know where it went from there. There was stuff done, but for us and the regulars, it kind of largely took us to 2003 before it really kicked off with Iraq.
Yeah, no, it did. To be fair, I think that shows sort of your character again, because I when I spoke to you in person again, which I have done on a few occasions now, you're really, really kind of humble about these incidents, which is a good way to be. We talked about it, but you're dead blasé with it. And like, oh yeah, just broke my neck and then cracked on. And again, I love that about you, to be fair, because it's like refreshing to just be no bullshit, no airs and graces. That's what happened, and I cracked on. You're a bit like shit. Things happen, but you kind of move on, and I do like that. It's good. It shows your resilience. But to bounce back from a serious injury like that is sort of again shows sort of your character. And not only did you bounce back, you went not long after that. You went on your sniper carder, didn't you?
Yeah, I think the sniper carder was 2002. I think early 2002 that would have been. So you did that, and then I think rest of that year was spent, or a lot of that year was spent doing some Northern Ireland specific training, which I won't probably go into too much. It was COT platoon, so it's nothing overly Gucci, but the only reason I won't give too many details is because I'm still living here. But that's quite an intense course, and the plan was to deploy for a couple of years over here. Start of 2003. That was kicked into touch when Iraq came up. Whatever it was, March 2003. Then we're deploying to Iraq for the invasion. Or I got shouted at once by the ambassador in Iraq for saying that. It's the liberation of Iraq. So yeah, 2003 off to Iraq for whatever that ended up, 4 or 5 months, was it? And to be honest, not that much happened. You sort of probably know yourself, it was a bit of an armoured battle. There was massive amounts of armour that kind of went over the border before us and just absolutely smashed the life out of the Iraqi army. So it was actually, I don't want to say quiet, but it certainly wasn't as kinetic as some other stuff we've done. It was a weird one because even though it was the invasion, Iraq further on down the line was probably a bit more dangerous. I don't want to take away from anything anyone done in 2003, but sort of for a few years after that, Iraq was properly dangerous.
Well, it fell apart. It was after the invasion. I know you can argue without getting political. They had a structure and they had someone in charge, albeit a dictator, but they had a structure. And once that structure had collapsed, it then opened the door for various factions to kind of, as it always does in these conflicts, opens up. There's a power struggle. You get various factions fighting for power, and that's exactly what happened. It became lawless. And I think you went back there later on, which we'll come on to. Did you go back there in close protection later on, or?
Well, I went back in 2005 briefly with battalion, sort of, and it was ramping up. I don't know, you've obviously done Iraq yourself, you know Route Irish. So we were basically employed driving up and down Route Irish, which is horrendous, because there's nothing really you can do apart from wait for the bang. But yeah, I went back not for long because I'd been on, I think I'd been on juniors just before that. So while the battalion went on tour, so I caught the tail end of that tour. And yet I went back with CP for 3 years in 2000, end of 2013. Bit of Basra, bit of Baghdad, nothing. Again, it had sort of calmed down a wee bit by then.
Yeah, I think post sort of there'll be people that will argue. I don't know. I finished working there 2010 because not that the risk had dropped, but the money had dropped in the industry I was working, which kind of led on to it being probably a bit safer post 2010. Don't get me wrong, it was still a place where shit happened. And you talk about Route Irish, and for the viewers and the followers that are watching this, Route Irish was deemed as the most dangerous road in the world for a large period of time, probably from 2004, probably up until 2013. I don't quote me on them figures. I don't know that, but it was open. It was surrounded by built-up areas to the side. It's a perfect place for ambushes, wasn't it? Where people could hide away in the buildings, open up on the road, and look, multiple. I think there's a book and a film about Route Irish.
Yeah.
And there's been subsequently loads of documented incidents where CP teams, US Army call signs have been ambushed and open onto. It was just a road. And I used to travel up it quite regular as well for a period of time in soft skin vehicles. But that's the beauty of youth thinking, no, I'll be all right. Looking back now, probably a bit like yourself with some of the stuff you've done, you go, fucking hell, I got through that pretty much unscathed, so to speak, which is incredible, really. So the Iraq tours sort of, you've come back from Iraq 2000 you went out there 2005. So then that leads me on to Herrick. Now, the 2006 tour is renowned for being when it all sort of kicked off in southern Afghanistan, properly when it became proper violent. And you was a company of Royal Irish that were picked or selected to go and work with the Parachute Regiment. Is that right?
Yes. I'm trying to get my dates right here. So yeah, we'd done Baghdad. I maybe went in juniors after Baghdad. I honestly can't remember, but what I do remember is when I came back, I'd been somewhere and I came back and they'd handpicked this platoon for Herrick. So yeah, to go with basically a platoon to reinforce 3-para, and I thought I need a piece of that. So I'll never forget. I just marched into the RSM's office. I think he said something like, "Don't do drill, Getty, you're shit." And I said, "Look, I need to be on this tour or in this platoon." And I think the deal was that I could go, but I wouldn't be able to go as a full screw. I'd have to go as a lance jack and do that, which was fine. In the end, I did the section commander job anyway. But yeah, so we had that platoon. A rough couple of months getting ready, as you can imagine. Sort of a platoon of hats, basically going down to 3-para to go to Afghan. There was a bit of pressure. And we trained hard for that. To be able to go down there and sort of, I'm not going to say show the paras up or anything like that, but at least be able to sort of match them. Little things, match their time on the 10-miler. Just do what we could to impress and try and fit in. And in the end, we did. I still talk to a lot of people from CPAR, good friends. I think Afghan doesn't give you the chance not to bond. You know what I mean? You can't be out there sort of, having a go at each other because you're different regiments and all. That's not how it works. But yeah, we did all right. And, what a tour. If you're talking about just, IEDs hadn't really come in then. It was a straight scrap. And if you're talking about sort of pure soldier, and that's kind of the tour people wanted. I'll never compare it to anything like the Falklands or some of the old tours, back in the day. But for the modern generation, that was the one, wasn't it? Just sort of going out the gate every day and meeting in the middle and see who won. And so, yeah, brilliant tour, brilliant sort of 7 months down with 3-par.
Yeah, well, I've talked to a few. I know a lot of Power Reg blokes from that were on that tour, and they speak very highly of the Royal Irish sort of contingent that were attached to them. They've got nothing but good stuff to say. And like you say, there's no place for it, is there? There's no place for squabbling and that. You've just got to fit in straight into it. When was the point that you got there, and when you thought, fuck, this is proper real? When can you pinpoint the exact day when you thought, holy shit, this is going to be interesting?
Yeah, I don't know the date. It was a place called Zumbale. It's been in the news and stuff as well. So nothing had happened. Certainly not for us and C Company at that time. It was, patrolling, and it had like a kind of Iraqi flavour. Nothing was really happening. And we went on sort of one of our normal patrols, meet the villagers, all that stuff in a place called Zumbale. And as we were coming out, the world just exploded. And it was just a massive ambush. Don't know how long, hours we were fighting for. I think that was probably mid-afternoon, and we got back to camp somewhere. I remember doing the debrief. It was around about sort of sunrise. So that was the sort of switch flicked that day. And then from then on in, that was it. Every day, you were at it. So that was probably about 2 months into the tour, and then just flat out. I mean, I don't need to tell you, mate. Everyone knows sort of what Afghan was like. Back then, it was just a really kinetic environment. And again, it's again, not taken away from tours after us, but we really were just one battalion in Helmand. That's not a lot of people.
No, not when you get hit in it every day. And I've read the book. I was fascinated by the book. About on the book. If you've not seen it, I think it's called. Is it called War? Is it? Well, you know what the book's called? I can't remember the name of the book.
I've seen a few. I don't really read the war books anymore, but there's definitely a few out there about sort of different tours, all Helmand, but different kind of tours and what was going on. There's definitely a few out there, possibly a few by some of the para guys. I can't remember exactly, but I mean, there's a load of Afghan stuff. But for me, it was a wee bit interesting because it was literally just a battle group, which is no amount of people. I'm not sure sort of how many battle groups we had out there towards the end.
The FOBs weren't set up then, though, were they? Nothing was really in place. They were being built by you guys and sort of engineers and stuff as it progressed. So you didn't have these forward operating bases that became later on later tours, did you? You were just sandbag positions, weren't you?
We first started. It was like we went to a place called Garesh first. which was a small sort of camp way outside the town. And it was sort of like a mini bastion. So you know the way they set up. They put a fence or a wall up, put a load of tents in, cookhouse tent, all that. And then we started to move out and started to take over buildings in these different places. Sangin is the sort of one that sticks in my mind. And just start to build up these. And that's how the FOB started. You just, at the very start, it was just a building, an empty building. I do remember, it sticks in my mind, because we went into Sangin early on and we occupied the building, which would become the FOB, and most of the platoon then went back up the road to get supplies. So they left a section, me and my section. I think there were 6 of us holding this FOB in Sangin. And it's one of those moments where I always think, how do we get away with that? 6
There's a lot. There's a lot of luck and fate involved in a lot of these things, isn't there? You were just looking, because I mean, I know for a fact you'd have put up a fight, but a section, if you're being attacked on all sides, ain't going to go down. It's not going to be. And I do remember talking to guys that saying that obviously they were prepared for it, but they weren't. So ammunition, you didn't have massive amounts of ammunition to start with, did you?
No, I mean, look, we had sort of normal scales going in. I think the big issue was always resupply, because once you hit these FOBs, you're getting resupplied by Chinook, and that's a big target. So you'd have things like, it only took a stray mortar, mate, that would put holes in all the jerry cans, and then you're suddenly asking yourself where the water's coming from. Luckily we never lost a Chinook, but it was an epic operation to get a Chinook in and out without being hit. I suppose you're living on a sort of knife edge out there, with water, with ammo, with Kazivacs. So you're right on the edge. Like you said, we've only started to build these FOBs, so we've not been able to stockpile ammo yet. Obviously you start doing that as you go on. If a Kazivac comes in, grab a load of ammo off it as well and kind of double up. But it was a bit of a knife edge at the start, yeah. Not that made us hold back on the ammo, don't get me wrong, we went for it. But I sort of, like I say, not taken away from any other tours or any other Hurrics. It was just a weird one because it was so new, such limited manpower, and so basic.
I think for the veterans and the people that were involved in those conflicts will agree with you on that because of the no real infrastructure set up by the British Army at that time. And I'm not saying it caught people off guard, but obviously it did to a certain extent. It went from being quiet and then, pretty much the switch was flicked and then it was all on. So you can't really prepare for that as such. You can only go with what the int you're getting. And I'm sure there would have been some int passed back that it was like the likelihood of something happening, but you still can't prepare for it. But I think most people would agree that watching this, that 06 tour would have probably been one of the I don't want to say harder tours, because again, I don't want to take anything away, but because of nothing being set up and sort of being caught off guard. But I don't think a lot of credit gets given as well to the pilots. You just touched on it there, Ian. Having to fly in, everyone kind of does remember the boots on the ground, but the pilots flying in there with that risk, massive, wasn't it? Massive target, like you said.
Yeah, and I mean, they need a lot of credit to them. It's a massive target, and they're in and out multiple times in a day. Sometimes, maybe we only seen them once in Sangin. We'd one Kazivac to do, but then they're off to Kajaki, then they're off, Naizad, then they're off somewhere else, and they're doing 10, 12 of these a day. And, getting shot at on most of them. We used to fan out and kind of put a perimeter in, but you can't push the perimeter far enough. The rounds are still coming in at the chopper. Yeah. The RPGs and stuff. So, and not just the pilots, those ones on the Merc teams and stuff that are sitting in the back, just in, out, it's a ballsy shout. Not for me, mate. I like being on the ground. I like getting my feet in the ground and getting off them choppers because, you do these assaults where, assaults where you'd fly in. I just want it off the chopper because it's just a big bullet magnet. And it's, again, I'm not even closely comparing it to sort of any other World War II stuff or D-Day, but that image, just absolutely packed into the back like sardines and you just want off.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Well, you're not in control, are you? You can't control what you're at the mercy of the pilot, and you're in there. At least when you're on the ground, you can choose what decision you go to, or where you take cover. So I get that. I understand that, and it is you just sat there almost waiting for the inevitable, aren't you? Like it's like shit. I remember we flew into Sierra Leone, and it's a funny story actually. When we went on Palliser before Barras, and we got told we were going into a sort of hot sort of landing zone, DZ, whatever you want to call it. So we're all loading, making ready on the back of the Chinook, ran off, took cover, and the RAF were there washing vehicles with the tops off on a Lungi airfield, and we were like, has this been some sort of fucking piss take or what? Just for the RAF to go, look at these clowns here, but hey ho. So yeah, I can't really relate going into an operation like that because I was out before then. But I do know, again, I've spoke to you in depth and a lot of guys that were on the ground, and they said it was like, but again, weirdly, some of the guys will always say it was such a simple time for them and they enjoyed being there. Does that ring true for you in a weird way?
yeah, I enjoyed it at the time. Yeah, for most of it, I think. I can't lie. At the end, I was getting tired. It was pretty busy. I do remember the last patrol we did. It was a night patrol, and the Afghan police opened up on us. I think it was something they used to do. They'd open up on you and then pretend it was a mistake. But I remember taking cover and saying what to one of the other section commanders. I says, "I'm not going out there. I've had enough. You're going to have to go and fight." And luckily, he was an absolute lunatic. So off he went. I seen him off a couple of times on the tour like that, but yeah, I remember being tired at the end. But most of the tour, it was brilliant, mate. It was brilliant, mate. It was sort of pure soldiering.
And
Sort
that
of pure infantry soldiering, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's hard for the wider population to get their head around because it was the guys that have been on the ground there and like yourself, they say simpler times. You knew what you were doing on a day to day. You didn't have to worry about the noise of everyday life back home. Right, social media was in its infancy back then, but you had none of that. It was just about getting up, admining yourself, going out and doing what you would needed to do, and then getting back and admining yourself again. So simple times, really.
Yeah, it was. I mean, sort of. Yeah, they're exactly right, mate. There's silly things you'd worry about normally. Don't count out there. Exactly what you said. Get up. You got up and you did what you had to do on a daily basis. And it was kind of whatever the patrol schedule was. Obviously stagging on as well was a part of it. But yeah, you just your life was laid out in front of you, and all I suppose I've heard it said before. All you're really focused on is getting through the day.
Simpler times, definitely. And like I say, I hear people speaking of fond memories, and obviously it's not until later on, which we'll probably come on to, because we talked about this, and I hope you won't mind me saying that you said it. That obviously the Sierra Leone had an impact on you, as it would do being held captive by the West Side Boys. Of course, it's going to have an impact on you. But you said later on in life, it was probably the Herrick tours that affected you more when it came to your mental health and stuff. Is that fair to say?
I'd probably say, look, I've always said it. I think the fact Sierra Leone was sort of, I don't want to say an interesting story, but it was a wee bit stranger than normal. So everywhere you went, you got asked about it. I told that story 1,000 times. And I always believe that just sitting telling that story over and over and over, whether it was in the pub or whoever it might have been, the odd presentation in the army, I think that took the sting out of Sierra Leone for me. Whereas it probably should have had an effect, but I think just telling it over and over sort of normalized it. And just talk. I was telling the story in the pub because people were interested in asking questions, but you're still talking about it. So I always felt that really took the sting out of Sierra Leone for me. I think sort of issues on down the line, probably a bit of Afghan, bit of Iraq, and a bit of going too long and not knowing when to take a break.
Yeah, that's the difficult bit. And I know the saying is it's good to talk, and I know that sounds a bit corny, but it is a way of how you counsel yourself. You told a story, whether that's down a pub, whether that's on a walk, whether that's, you know, wherever it is, you're telling, and you're almost offloading it, aren't you? You're offloading that kind of stuff that you've got stored in your brain. So that kind of, obviously it's worked for you for a certain amount of time until you realise you had a few issues, and which we'll hopefully come on to. But obviously that the Heric Tour's finished. I don't want to delve too much into the Heric Tour because I'm kind of planning, and I want to, as we've done the Barras podcast, I'm hoping we can do a Heric kind of tour where we have guests in person, just because I think it's good. I think it's good for everyone involved. And I said this to you down on the Barras one as well, Ian. I think, you know, for you getting a different side of it that you never knew before, it closes the loop. And I don't know if you agree with that, but hearing the story from one of the Power Edge guys on the ground that did the village assault, you weren't part of that. Obviously, you were involved, obviously being a hostage in the rescue mission, so you saw that side and you never saw the planning side. So to get a full picture of the whole events, I'm hoping, as well as it being interesting and getting the story out there for the wider public, I'm hoping it gives you, the guys involved, some form of closure as well. Would you say that's a fair thing to say?
Yeah, definitely. Barras is a classic one for it. As we sort of we mentioned, without going into too much detail, the trip back to Barras where we all got together, sort of the rescue teams, pilots, the hostages. And actually it was the first time we'd really all got together since it, so 25 years later. But I think everyone said this should have been done a long time ago. Everybody sitting down and just thrashing that out, getting the other, you know, like I say, I got to go back to McBenney where one para hit. And I maybe there for an hour and a half, maybe longer, sort of walking around with these guys that have been on it from the paras, hearing their story, and just, it's stuff you don't know anything about. You know, it's really interesting and really good to do. Just to, you know, get all those different perspectives and kind of, you know, hear different, you know, everyone has a different perspective, but to hear all that from sort of different people, different sides of the operation, I think it's almost essential. I'm not sure why we didn't do it at the time, but we didn't.
I suppose, look, there's never a right time or a wrong time. It just so happened that, you know, around the 25th of February. We'll come on to your journey back there a bit later on. But obviously, 06 tour's finished, you've come back, and then you've gone on another tour in 08 back to Afghan as a JTAC. Just explain what the JTAC role is for the viewers and stuff, because I get a lot of criticism, Ian, about abbreviations and stuff, and I'm not going to lie, I can't remember half of them myself. It's been a long time, so just explain what the role of a JTAC is.
Well, JTAC's an American one, but it sounds a bit cooler. In British Army, it's a forward air controller. So, yeah, essentially, you're the guy on the ground with whatever unit it is, kind of speaking with the pilots, whether that be surveillance or, you know, kind of, you know, fast air, Apache, whatever it is. And you're sort of the one that kind of, well, you give them the target basically and make sure it's the right target. And then they do what they do and drop something that makes a big bang. So, yeah, I did that course in 2007. It's a gleaming course. It's a wee bit tasty, but it's gleaming. It's quite long as well. I think I can't remember exactly the course, whatever it is, 7 weeks maybe. But then there's a lot of follow-up training. You basically spend the rest of your time before you deploy on tour, kind of practicing. And yeah, so we went out attached to RHA. So they put you in with, they call it a TAC-P. I can't remember what that is, a Tactical Air Control Party, something like that. So it's a JTAC. They've got a couple of, or they've got like an artillery FOO, a forward observation officer, and a few mortar fire controllers, stuff like that. So basically a full team to direct all the indirect fire. And yeah, we went out and did the first sort of 6-8 weeks maybe with the Estonians up in Nizad, which was interesting. Great blokes, but a wee bit more gung-ho. Health and safety wasn't as big. And that was brilliant. And then a bit of time in Musakala, a bit of time in Sangin. Sort of, yeah, just doing what I did. I went out in the patrols, and if we needed fast air, we called it in. I'll be honest, I probably spent 90% of the time, maybe more, just not needing to drop anything. It's doing surveillance. So, you know, we have a jet or a couple of jets with cameras for 2 hours. Let's go looking for firing points. You know, let's start mapping out approach routes from the Taliban. So most of it was actually surveillance type stuff. and then every now and then you got to drop a fizzer on someone, which is probably about the most nervous I've ever been in the army.
Well, you got to get that right, haven't you?
You've got, yeah, it's if that goes wrong, you're in a world of hurt. But yeah, that was another 7 months in Afghan, doing the JTAC bit, which I loved, and a couple of perks. You got to hang out with the pilots as well. They live a different life back in places like Camp Bastion, with their PlayStations and stuff.
I bet they do.
So there's perks to the job, but yeah, it was it was another decent tour. It was slightly different. They were starting to use the IEDs then, which I think are worse than the kinetic stuff. Certainly a lot harder psychologically than going out just for a scrap. So yeah, like I said, talking about 2006, I would never take away from any of the other tours, because there was units out there at kind of the peak of the IED season that had hard tours.
Yeah, they kind of switched tactics, didn't they? And I don't know if they realised they wouldn't gain in ground, but they're almost like guerrilla tactics with the IEDs, and that they're horrible because you can't. I know you can't plan for any of it, but an IED will catch you off guard, and it causes catastrophic kind of, not panic, but it is effective at disrupting everything, isn't it? And it's like you say, you're out in the middle of nowhere, an IED, limbs missing or a lot worse, and then it's just trying to CASEVAC that target. It takes multiple people to come and sort of help with that one individual. So you can see why it was done, but it's just a nasty thing. And like you say, the psychological aspect of it, it's not going to be pleasant. And I do know a lot of people that speak of that, and that's the bit that kind of plays on people's minds and stuff from that period of time. Which kind of just moves on. You stayed in sort of your unit for a further sort of 5 years after that. I'm assuming doing various different courses. Any more career courses after that?
No, I'd seniors done by that stage. I went to Catterick for 2 years. Came back. Nothing really overly significant. Sort of during that time. I think the last 18 months, or close to when I got out, before I signed off, the last 18 months, I think we were on a build up for another Afghan. And yeah, to be honest, I was starting to get disillusioned. Catterick had annoyed me slightly because, we don't. I was training Royal Irish jocks and stuff. We don't have that filter of P company, and there was too many people getting through that shouldn't have got through because there's a quota to be hit. Yes, and that was annoying me. And then I spent 18 months training for Afghan, and it was a lot of, the focus maybe was in the wrong. Getting a sort of bollocking because you don't have your issue eye protection on, and I get where they're coming from with that, but it seemed like the focus was in the wrong place. It started to annoy me a wee bit. But the other thing is, I was tired, mate. By then, that was 7 tours in, and I was just like, I'm not doing this for another, whatever it would have been, 7-8 years. I was tired, so it took me a week. Sitting in my friend's office, he was the RQ, before I pressed the button to go, because probably yourself, it's hard to sign off. It's a big step.
They offer you all sorts to stay in, don't they? They want to keep you, and especially if your level. I mean, I did nowhere near the career length that what you've did, or involved in the things that you were involved in, but it kind of, it's a difficult decision because it's a safety net. It's all you've ever known up until that point. And I say this is probably the bit that really kind of the transition. We talk about the transition quite a lot, from being in the military, institutionalized by the military. It's all you know, to step away and then do something completely different. Now, it is a difficult decision, but they want to keep you in, don't they? They do want to keep you in. They spend a lot of money on you. You're an experienced soldier at this time, Ian, with several tours. They want your knowledge to be passed on.
They definitely do. Yeah, look, they'll offer you everything. I think I got offered a colour sergeant post the op tag. My view was that if you give me that because I've signed off, that's taking it off someone else who's getting it because they've earned it. But yeah, look, I was tired, mate. I think when the time's right. They can offer what you want, but if you know, and they don't want me staying in because they've offered me this or that, and just I'm going at it sort of half-arsed. I knew it was the time to go. Now, being the average infantry squaddy that I was, instead of sorting myself out on resettlement, I'd had my mind made up. I'm going to Iraq. So from someone saying they were tired of tours and stuff, I went straight back out to Iraq for 3 years. So yeah, makes sense out of that one. I don't know.
Well, it's what you know, and you do. You fall, and you've had enough of the military side of it. I think you have enough of the politics and the bullshit is where you kind of end up. You start, you get, like you say, you got disillusions, didn't you? You had enough of the bollocks, and then you go into the CP market and there's a lot less bollocks involved in that. It's better money. You treat it better. So you can understand the transition, why soldiers do it. You're using the skills that you've been taught, but you treat it better, treated more like an adult than you were in the military. Would you agree with that?
In a way, my first sort of year was with an Iraqi company. And it wasn't great. You've sort of probably mentioned it. Not but the wages were okay if you got them, but what really annoyed me there was I found that by that stage standards had went real down because there was so many people doing it. You know, and we had people out there that were past experience as a doorman, and suddenly they're in Iraq. Some really, really good operators as well. It was a weird place in that company. You know, you guys that were sort of, I think, XSF, executive outcomes, you know, they'd done a lot of stuff. But then on the flip side, you had this guy in the next wagon who was a doorman. And I mean, as you said yourself, the wages were starting to go down. You know, a lot of times our guys weren't getting paid because the Iraqis had decided to spend the wages on a new car or something, stuff like that. And then I could see other companies as well were starting to do things. So the wages were dropping, wages were getting silly. You know, there was companies out there were paying £150 a day, and that was only if you went on patrol. I got lucky. I had a few friends up in the embassy in Baghdad. It was Garda World contract at the time, which I got onto. Got in there, classic Getty luck. As soon as I joined, there was a space in the ambassadors team, which was gleaming. So I got 2 years on the ambassadors team up there, which was I enjoyed, and it was salaried as well because it was linked to the government. It was salaried, so you were guaranteed your money every month. I did that for sort of that another 2 years, but at the same time as I was out there, sort of, I decided to do a degree, and don't ask me why. I think I had some friends from the army who had done a master's degree, and I thought I'll have a crack at this, which took me right to the limit of my brain power. But I scraped through in the end, and then I was sort of getting tired of the CP world a bit. Again, I was thinking, you know, maybe I've had enough of this, but classic sort of Ian Getty logic again. Well, essentially, I'll tell the story. I'd had a friend who'd been in the regiment and had then gone on the CP back early in the days, and it actually ended up out in Ukraine. Was out there sort of around the time, I think was it MH11 that was shot down, the Malaysian plane.
Yeah.
Had sort of was doing security stuff around that, and then he ended up in this organisation called the which I'll come on to in a minute, because if you think the army or something's dysfunctional at times or political, you want to see these clowns. But he basically said there's jobs coming up, and how that works is you apply through the Foreign Office, so you're employed by the UK government, but you're seconded to this agency. And so yeah, in 2017 ended up out in Ukraine. Sort of the long story short, it's a monitoring operation. So back then there was the war was going on in eastern Ukraine, but it was not like it is now. It was a bit sort of more static kind of. But we were just, there'd been a peace agreement made with all these regulations about, you know, basically it was meant to be a ceasefire. You can't have certain weapons in certain places, all this. And we went out, we just patrolled the contact line every day, kind of looking for breaches of the ceasefire, essentially. And then we put a report together that goes up to, you know, essentially the EU and all the foreign ministers, and then they sort of come together and decide what to do. So that was the next 5 years of my life out in Ukraine.
Which is, again, you know, you've done a lot up until this point. and you're thrown back into and what people don't realize as well, and not just the risks that you face, but the kind of jumping from contract to contract, the uncertainty, the being away from home, all that plays a massive part. And it gets to a point where you do think, you know what, there's got to be more to this. And obviously the Ukraine, I'm not going to delve into that stuff out there too much, just because that is still current. There are people still operating out there, so I don't think it's fair to really touch on that in depth. That's probably for later down the line when things calm down out there. But obviously, in your own words, this is where kind of stuff started to fall apart with your kind of mental health. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I've always said, mate, I'm probably talking nonsense, but I've always said I know the exact day the switch went in my head. And I'm not sure, we've probably talked about it before, but so I'd been out there a few months and they started making these new teams, drone teams, technical monitoring teams they called them, but basically flying drones and to sort of get that bird's eye view of the contact line. I could say that it's all open source. And I applied. I had no idea about drones. I just thought that sounds a bit Gucci. And I got the job. And so I think I moved to that new job on the Thursday. And either the Saturday or the Sunday, my old patrol and the wagon I would have been in, they hit an anti-tank mine and the medic was killed. And I remember I was sitting that night with a guy, an American friend of mine, I'm obviously having a drink. And I couldn't shake it out of my brain that, how have I dodged this again? That's too many times I've dodged a bullet. Sierra Leone, the broken neck, Afghan, and now this. I've just been dodging bullets my whole life, and I don't know how. And from there in, mate, it started to sort of unravel from there. I was getting this like absolute panic inside me. On these patrols out there weren't that dangerous, mate, to be honest. That was a freak accident. The Russians and the Ukrainians were very, very good at not hitting us. But I had this panic, and again, I think I've heard you mention it before. It started freaking me out because it wasn't just a panic. You get like a physical thing. I felt like I couldn't breathe, and just every day this feeling that I couldn't breathe. And then it was escalating. I stayed out for 5 years because the money was great, which was about 4 years too long, probably. But just, yeah, that feeling. And then just other things on top of that. I'll tell you one incident at a checkpoint where it was on the rebel side, and they told us you're not flying the drone today. And our headquarters in Kiev, about 1,000 miles away, just kept pushing and pushing and pushing to fly this drone. So we did anyway, and basically the checkpoint started firing at us. I think it was warning shots, mate. They were all over the top. If it wasn't warning shots, they're terrible shots. But it all went well, mate. Nothing happened. I felt okay. I had the team with me. I had the girl that was flying the drone. She was brilliant. No panic. And we got out of there. But we did sort of our after action review a couple of days later. And I remember just a massive panic attack. And again, I think you've mentioned it before. I thought I was dying. So I started getting these panic attacks, which I couldn't shake. I was getting that sort of, I couldn't breathe every day. I was just having a terrible time. Self-medicating, if I'm honest. So it's like there was a drinking culture out there anyway. But I was taking the piss out of it, to be honest, mate. When you're cracking 2 beers before work to steady the nerves to get you through the patrol, and then all I could do was I just wanted to get in, get that patrol report done, and get out. And by the end, there was a bar on the way home that would have the Stella sitting waiting for me before I even got there.
Yeah, there's a time then when you realise there's a bit of an issue there, isn't there?
Well, there definitely was, and it was getting worse and worse until I just had one of those panic attacks. And sort of had to reach out. I think I posted something on a group I was an admin in called Warriors RV on Facebook. Absolutely brilliant group. And I think within a couple of hours I was talking to Rock to Recovery. And again, long story short, I got home a couple of days later. I was flown home. I was in bits. I didn't realise how in bits I was till I actually got home. I remember my sister had cooked up some food, and I remember I couldn't even eat, mate, and I was shaking. And I sort of found out at that point that without going too political, the government do not care. I was employed by them, and what I sort of got back was, well, what do you want us to do? And what they did was absolutely nothing. I got really lucky because COVID was still about, but my GP, who's sort of very pro-veteran, agreed to meet me outside, and he got me on sort of some medication and stuff. So I got lucky that way. But a bit of a journey from then, trying to find places where you can get help. There's loads of great small charities out there, but they're so restricted in their funding. So they'll take you on, but they can't afford to keep you on. They'll do 10 sessions, 12 sessions, and then somebody else has to get it. So yeah, I've had about 6 months on sick leave before the Foreign Office says you'll not get a medical clearance to go back out to Ukraine, which actually worked out okay because it was just before the invasion when the mission closed down anyway. But yeah, rough couple of years.
No, I bet, me. And like I say, thanks for sharing that, because it's not easy for anyone. You know why I do the podcast is to get these stories out there and just sort of emphasizing the fact that you get to a point where you need to seek that help and knowing there's something wrong, and you recognized it. So again, that's your character. You recognized it, albeit a bit later down the line, because again, those panic attacks, if people has never had one, they are horrendous. You don't know what it is because your mind sort of feels all right, but then it manifests itself in these physical attacks that are horrible. And I've experienced some stuff over my career, but not like the level of what you've experienced, certainly with Sierra Leone and in Afghanistan. I'm always open about that, but it doesn't necessarily always take something big like that. And like you say, this is long after those events when you've started to kind of suddenly realize, hold on a minute, there's something not right. And you've seeked out, and quite rightly so, there are lots of them. There's lots of them charities out there, the little charities that will get you help there and then. They will speak to you literally that day, and they're brilliant, but they're so underfunded. And I try and push a lot of them charities out there and make them aware. There'll be some of those charities in this link when this podcast goes out if anyone is struggling. But no, it's a difficult thing, and obviously you knew it was time. So, and it's worked in your favor now, because kind of moving on to where we're at now, you said yourself you went into sort of cyber security, and more recently you've been working with Veterans for Veterans, who obviously sponsor the podcast, and we both sort of do bits and bobs for them. And that's sort of things that they're trying to push in the future, help for people and do all that kind of stuff, aren't they? So yeah, but thanks for sharing that, Pop. How is the recovery going now, Ian, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, mate, it's all good. You have to manage it. So it's, I suppose, like I say, you'll get limited sessions with a lot of these people through no fault of their own. They just don't have the money. So you've kind of got to take away whatever techniques they give you, and things like this, and build your own toolkit. Because there is ways to get past those panic attacks and all. You just have to learn them. And yeah, you just need to keep on top of it, because I don't think it would ever take much to sort of go on the downward spiral again. But yeah, look, for me, not too bad. And I think it's getting better every day. I work with sort of a group over here called Roadmap to Recovery, which was set up by, it's actually one of the charities I went to. There's a guy there, Michael, who absolutely pro-veteran, does everything he can. But I mean, it's nothing massive. All it is a sort of a get together every kind of couple of weeks. It's somewhere between official counselling and just sitting down with your mates having a brew. But it works, because people come in there in real bad order. But there's always someone there that's been in the same place and is now through it. I think you've probably said that the most important bit, mate. You need to recognise when you're about to pile in.
And it's about surrounding yourself with like-minded individuals. We say it all the time. When you leave these organisations, whether it be the fire service, emergency services, or you step away from working in Ukraine or Iraq, because you're working with like-minded individuals most of the time. But once you step away from that and you sort of become a bit isolated, that's where a lot of the time I've noticed, and I'm no expert by at all, but what I've noticed is when we step away from those organisations, you've lost a bit of a support network, and then all of a sudden you're like, so these get-togethers, as much as they don't seem that kind of important as such, but they are massively important in another way, because you're communicating with people that face the same struggles as you do, don't they?
It's exactly that, mate. Look, to give you an idea of how it works, so you go in at the start, you sit down with your brew, and everybody gives a score out of 10 for how they feel. And then you go around the room, and, if someone's got this problem, that problem, it could be anything. And there's, like I say, there's always someone there that's been through it, or who will know, look, try this, try that. And then you give a final score at the end. And I don't think I've ever seen one of them where people aren't slightly better off at the end, scores wise. And it can be little things, people are a bit down, maybe, I don't know, financial worries or whatever it might be, right up to people who are really, really, really struggling. Where, I don't think it's a stretch to say you've probably, some of those meetings have pulled a few people back from the brink. I don't think that's a stretch. I think every now and then someone who's probably not probably close to being on their way out, I'll say, taking their own life, and you pull them back from the brink. So yeah, stuff like that, it's massive, and it's a good way it's like a bit of fire support for the official stuff. I keep saying Rock to Recovery because they help me, or Inspire over in Northern Ireland. But to support all them little charities, it's just a bit of a bonus on top, and just another way to manage it, and keep on top of it. So yeah, they're worth their weight in gold.
No, absolutely, Ian, and it's good to see you in a lot better place. I'm being completely honest. Like I say, I've met you in person on a few occasions now, and I think you're a genuinely lovely bloke. Like I say, I love how humble you are about it. But I just want to thank you as well for sharing. I want to thank you for your incredible career and what you've done for the country. Thank you for your service, and also for coming on here and sharing your your struggles as well, because it's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do at all, and to come on here and talk about it for people to see, I think it will help a lot of people. And we talked about trying to get you to write a bit of this down about your story. Again, typical humble Ian Getty. You were like, oh no one wants to hear that. I genuinely think that the wider population would love to see you write a book about your experiences. One, because it's one hell of a career, and two, because I just think it would help people as well. So if that opportunity arises, as we talked about, I think you should snap that up. That's obviously down to you, Ian.
Well, we'll see, mate. Like I say, well, I've said to you before, we've all done stuff, There's 1,000 other books out there that people have done, so
But not your story, though. But not your story.
Yeah, we'll see, mate.
No, well, look, Ian, absolute pleasure chatting to you. Thank you again for coming on and sharing your amazing career and your your story and your recovery. I think it'll be massively beneficial to the people watching it, and I've enjoyed talking to you. Obviously, we're going to stay in touch through Veterans for Veterans and stuff like that, and the stuff that we've got coming up. Thank you very, very much for your time, Ian. It's been a pleasure.
No worries, mate. Thanks for having me on.
Anytime.
Cheers, mate.